Today on Hebrew Grammar Help, Hif'il verbs. Shalom lekulam and welcome back to Hebrew Grammar Help. I'm Sapir and today I'm going to be getting back to my series on verb conjugations, and I'm going to continue on with Hif'il verbs. So this is a new binyan that I have not talked about before, and this one is particularly Gizrat Hashlemim. So these are the regular conjugations. So in this video, I'll be doing all of the various conjugations, the past, the present, the future, and also the imperative, as well as the infinitive and the Shem Peula, the verbal noun. So this is my fourth video on verb conjugations. I did 2 on Pa'al verbs and 1 on PL. And you do not need to have already seen those. This video will stand on its own. However, I might be using some terminology that I'm not going to actually define. So if you're not 100% up on your verb vocabulary, you might want to check out these videos. So I've got G7, Shorashim, G8, verbs, the basics, G9, verb tenses, and G11, recognizing binyanim. But hopefully you already know that a shoresh is a 3 or 4 letter root that forms the basis of all of the verbs and even a lot of other words. And that a binyan is like a verb category. All of the words of a particular binyan share a lot of the characteristics of their conjugations. So this is binyan Hif'il, Gizrat Hashlemim. That means regular. It literally means the complete Gizra, the Gizra of that is complete. And it's because none of the letters drop out or change in any of the conjugations. 2 things make Hif'il verbs stand out. One of them is that they always have a prefix right before the first shoresh letter. And this prefix is usually a hey or a mem, but it can also be one of the personal prefixes in the future tense. Future tense always has a different prefix depending on which person is going to be doing the action. So that takes the place of the hey or the mem. But the second thing that identifies a verb as a Hif'il verb is an E sound towards the end of the verb. It's always between the second and the third shoresh letters. And there's an E sound with a chirik vowel, and also a yud always shows up in the writing. So that helps us identify Hif'il verbs. And remember, when we learn verbs, we always learn their templates. So we learn the template for the entire category, the entire binyan, and then we practice putting in an example shoresh so that we can see the verb kind of in action. We can see what it actually sounds like. Okay, so here we have the infinitive template for Hif'il verbs. And remember, infinitive is the kind of verb that's not really attached to a person or a tense. And it's in English, we make our infinitives by saying to do something. So to want, to drive, to feel. We can't really use them in a sentence that way unless there's another conjugated verb before them. And conjugated means it does have tense and a subject. It kind of matches it matches a person, it matches a time in some way, shape, or form. And so looking at this template, we see a lamed at the beginning with a schwa under it. So it's going to sound like le. And then we have a hey with a patach sounding like ha. So we have leha. And then we have this green space with a schwa under it. And next we have an orange space with a dagesh inside and followed by a chirik and then a yod, and then we have our purple space. And so these 3 spaces are reserved for the shoresh letters, and those are going to be different depending on what you want to say. But as long as you don't have any problem letters, this is the template, and you're just going to stick your shoresh letters into those 3 spaces. So let's get a little practice sticking some shoresh letters into these spaces. We're going to start with the shoresh resh gimel shin, which has to do with feeling and emotion. Now, resh is a guttural letter, so no matter what, it is never going to get any kind of a dagesh on it. But there also isn't a dagesh in the template. And so what that means to us is that if this letter is a bet, a kaf, or a pei, it's going to have its soft fricative sound. So v or ch or f. This orange box does have a dagesh, and it is a hardening dagesh, not a doubling dagesh. So the reason this is important to know whether it's a hardening dagesh or a doubling dagesh for people who do insist on writing with nikud is that there are a bunch of letters that are not begad kafat letters, but are also not guttural letters. If you see a dagesh in a template, it'll be important to those letters, whether that dagesh is the hardening dagesh or the doubling dagesh. And to the vast majority of us who, because we're adults and we don't write with nikud, it only matters if that letter is a bet, a kaf, or a pei. And we don't care if it's a hardening dagesh or a doubling dagesh, because it's going to have the same effect. Both dageshes have the exact same effect on those 3 letters, which is to make them sound like their plosive sound, b, k, and p, as opposed to v, ch, and f. None of my teachers ever used that word. We never wrote them. We just listened to the way she said the words, and we tried to follow along. So the moral of the story is, dagesh equals plosive sound, no dagesh equals fricative sound. Okay, so our first shoresh letter is resh. It goes in this green box. The second letter is a gimel. And so if we're writing with nikud, we are going to put that dagesh in there because gimel is a begad kafat letter, even though in modern Hebrew it does not have a different pronunciation based on whether it has the dagesh or not. They both sound like g. And lastly, we have the shin in the purple box. And of course, the last letters of a word very rarely get a vowel, and that is the case here. So, voila, lehargish. It means to feel. All right, let's look at the shoresh gimel bet lamed. We get the word gvul from this shoresh, and that means border or frontier. And so in the Hif'il, we have lehagbil. And that means to limit or restrict or confine. So, of course, a border is like the limit between 2 countries. And so that's why this also means to limit, lehagbil. Notice that it's lehagbil and not lehagvil, right? Because we've got that dagesh in there. And then I love this word, lehadgish. Do you see the shoresh? It's dalet gimel shin. Can you think of a word with that shoresh? It's a grammar word. It's dagesh. And dagesh is that little dot that makes us kind of change the sounds of our words. And so it means, a dagesh means like a dot of emphasis. And so lehadgish means to emphasize. All right, that's how it's done. Now you can make infinitives in Hif'il. But of course, that's not where it ends. We need to continue on with the past, the present, and the future, and also imperative. All right, so remember, present tense only varies by gender and number, not by person. The base form is the masculine singular. Now, all of these forms are going to have a mem at the beginning. This is a prefix, and it's, again, one of the indicators of a Hif'il verb. A mem with a patach under it. If you are familiar with PL verbs, they have their present tense has a mem with a schwa under it. So the mem with the patach is that vowel, or we don't write it with nikud, but that vowel sound is important. And so let's look at the masculine singular. We get that ma prefix, and then we have the first shoresh letter with a schwa under it with no sound. We get the second shoresh letter with a chirik, and then we have that yod. So the yod is basically there to let us all know there's an e sound here, since we don't write with nikud. And then we've got that last shoresh letter. Now, the other forms are just going to get suffixes on the end indicating gender and number, and it's not going to, they are going to have stress. The stress is going to be on the suffix, but it is not going to change any vowel in that stem of that verb. So in other binyanim, that does happen where when a suffix is added to the end, sometimes there's a vowel somewhere earlier in the word that reduces to a schwa, but that does not happen at all in Hif'il. And so the feminine singular of Hif'il verbs is going to have an a suffix. So that last letter of the shoresh is going to have a kamatz, and then you're going to have a hey. And this is a little bit different from the regular pa'al verbs and the PL verbs. The feminine got an et suffix, but in Hif'il it's going to be an a suffix, and the stress is going to be on that a. Okay, plural masculine is going to have a chirik under that last shoresh letter, and then a yud, and then a mem sofit, and so it's going to have that im suffix. And plural feminine is going to have a cholam maleh, so it looks like a vav with a dot at the top, and then a taf at the end, and it's going to sound like ot. So if we use our favorite sample shoresh for Hif'il verbs, resh gimel shin, we get margish, margisha, margishim, margishot. All right, now you know all of the Hif'il regular present tense templates. So let's move on to past tense. Remember, the name of the binyan is what the shoresh pei ayin lamed, which means like action, activity, would sound like in that binyan in the third person singular masculine, so the hu form. And so hif'il, we can tell just from the fact that it's hif'il that the masculine is going to be he-e, right? That's going to be the vowel pattern. So our shoresh is resh gimel shin, so it's going to be hirgish for the hu form. So all of the forms in the past tense have the hey with the chirik under it, and then that first shoresh letter is going to have a schwa under it. So that's among all of the forms. But first person and second person are actually going to have a patach vowel under their second shoresh letter, whereas the third person's always going to have another chirik. And then they all have their suffixes that match the person, the subject of this verb. And one thing that's a little bit different with Hif'il is that in the past tense, the stress is always going to be on the second syllable. In other binyanim, the stress sometimes shifts to the last syllable, to like that, to the suffix, but not in Hif'il. That stress stays on the second syllable. These are so hard to go through. In the past I've gone through them with a without the sample shoresh. It makes it so confusing. So we're gonna stick our shoresh in there and go through this verb. Ani hirgashti. Ata hirgashta. At hirgasht. Hu hirgish. He hirgisha. Anachnu hirgashnu. Atem hirgashtem. Aten hirgashten. Hem vehen hirgishu. So did you hear the stress? It's always on the second syllable. All right, moving on to future tense. You can see it's getting dark where I am. Remember, future tense always has a prefix that matches the subject of that verb, and some of them also have a suffix. The forms that don't have a suffix always rhyme with the infinitive. So our infinitive is something like leha'i, that's the vowel pattern of the infinitive. And so the future tense is going to be a-i, and then ta-i, ya-i, na-i. So all those prefixes have a patach, just like the hey has in the infinitive. So as I go through these, think about how they sound like lehargish. Ani argish. Ata targish. At targishi. Hu yargish. He targish. Remember, the he form is always exactly the same as the ata form. Anachnu nargish. Atem ve'aten targishu. Hem vehen yargishu. And again, I don't know if you noticed, the stress is always on the second syllable. It doesn't shift to the last syllable. And also because of that, no vowels anywhere get reduced to a schwa. All of the vowels maintain their original quality. Now to make the imperative the command form, now remember, we don't need to use an actual command form. If you're making a negative command, remember you cannot use the actual imperative forms. You have to use al plus the future tense. But if you are making a positive command, you can still just use the future tense, or you can choose to use the command form, which is a little bit more fancy. You don't hear so much use of the actual regular command forms when you're just talking in casual conversation. But I will teach them to you anyway. So the way to form the commands is you take the future tense. You've got three different people who you might give a command to. You've got ata, at, and atem ve'aten, which is going to have the same forms. So all three of these people have a taf prefix. And what you're going to do is remove that taf prefix and replace it with a hey. And you are 99% there. The one weird thing about the ata form is that vowel, the E vowel, the one that lets us know this is a Hif'il verb, it's going to change to a tsere. So it's going to have an E sound, and it is also not going to have a yud in between the second and the third shoresh letters. So this doesn't happen with the at or the atem form. It's only with the ata form. So with our favorite shoresh, resh, gimel, shin, we're going to have hargesh, hargishi, hargishu. And lastly, we have the shem peula, the verbal noun. This is a noun that comes from the verb. So with our favorite shoresh here, resh, gimel, shin, it's going to have the sense of feeling or emotion or something like that, right? It's a noun that comes from that verb to feel. So here's our regular template. We're going to have a hey that has a patach. Then that first shoresh letter is going to have a schwa. And then the second and the third shoresh letters are both going to have kamatz. And then we're going to have a hey at the end. This is another emkriya, another hey that's just there to indicate the a vowel at the end of the word. These words, because they end with a kamatz hey, they're all going to be feminine. And so for lehargish, we're going to get Hargasha, feeling, emotion. If we want lehamlitz, which lehamlitz means to recommend, hamlatza is a recommendation. All right, that's it for today. So dark out. Now you know all of the regular conjugations of Hif'il verbs. It's another really common bunch. You really need to know all of the binyanim to be able to navigate in Hebrew. As usual, if you have any questions or feedback, please leave it in the comments. And if you have any grammar situation that has you flummoxed, leave that in the comments and I will do my best to do a video about it. Hit like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to see more. Lehitraot, Papa Ama Ba'a. See you next time.